I found out my girlfriend was only with me as part of a bet, so I exposed her lies and humiliated her in front of our friends to get my revenge. For as long as I can remember, I have always felt like a pretty normal guy. I come from an ordinary family, one of those that lives in a quiet residential neighborhood, with parents who strive to give us the best, and a younger brother who has not yet entered the teenage rebellion stage. My father works as an electrician technician and my mother is an administrative assistant in a doctor's office, so we have never lacked the essentials, although we have not been swimming in luxury either. I do not have extravagant tastes. I enjoy video games, science fiction series, and going out with my friends for simple plans like going to the movies or eating pizza. In high school, my grades are average and I do not usually stand out in theoretical subjects. Although I do like history, and sometimes I find myself reading about ancient battles or biographies of characters that I find interesting. What has stood out about me since I was little is my height. I was always the tallest kid in the class, the one who sat in the back for group photos. At 13 years old, I was already about 1.80 meters tall, and by the time I turned 18, I was well over 2 meters tall. Being over 2 meters is a curious experience. Everyone asks you for help to reach things on high shelves. There is no bed that fits you comfortably, nor a car where you do not have to hunch your back, and of course, everyone asks you if you play basketball. In my case, yes, I do play basketball, and it is not simply because my body is ideal, with long arms and athletic legs, but because I am truly passionate about it. I joined the high school team in my sophomore year of school, and since then, I have committed myself to training, games, and everything that being on a sports team implies. As I grew up, my performance on the court improved a lot. I became the starting center for the team, and, without exaggerating, you could say that I became one of the promising players in the region. I am not a superstar in life or anything like that, but I did manage to attract the attention of several universities that offered me the possibility of scholarships in Division I of the university circuit. It is a fact that, as soon as I graduate, I will be able to choose from several options to continue my studies and keep playing. Of course, it excites me, but it also makes me a little nervous because it involves a big change. Moving to another city, adapting to a new environment, and trying to earn a spot on a university team that, without a doubt, will be more competitive than what I have experienced so far. As for my personality, people perceive me as calm, friendly, and sometimes a bit shy. I am not the type to dominate a conversation or tell jokes to get noticed, but I do not stay isolated in a corner either. I simply prefer to keep a low profile and enjoy the moment without needing to hog the attention. Perhaps for that reason, I was never especially popular. Suffice it to say that, although I play on the basketball team and socialize with people who are considered cool, I do not participate in the typical wild parties that popular kids usually throw, nor do I boast about my stats on the court. My circle of friends is limited to a few classmates, especially my best friend, whom I will call Tony to maintain his anonymity, and a couple of colleagues from the team who, like me, prefer quiet nights of pizza and video games instead of clubs filled with loud music. However, everything changed one Friday afternoon when one of my teammates, Dylan, invited us to a small get-together at a friend's house. Dylan is the complete opposite of me. Extroverted, loud, a partier, obviously handsome. In high school, girls usually sigh for him, and guys see him as an example of overflowing charisma. Even so, I have nothing against him. In fact, I like him and I feel that his cheerful and carefree way of being complements my more reserved nature. I decided to go because he insisted that it would be a good time to socialize with other people, especially with some girls who were also going to attend. I do not usually get along well with parties, but this gathering seemed more like a calm hangout, something in a backyard with music, soft drinks, and maybe a drink or two, although I do not drink alcohol. So I called Tony to see if he was going too, but he told me he had a family commitment and could not join me. In the end, I went alone, with a little anxiety, but willing to have a good time. The gathering was taking place in the backyard of a fairly large house, with string lights and a table full of snacks. When I arrived, I greeted Dylan, who was with two other friends from the team. We chatted for a while about the next game and the strategy the coach was designing. Shortly after, several girls joined us who, at first glance, looked popular, well-kept hairstyles, fashionable clothes, confident smiles. One of them in particular caught my attention from the very first moment. Her name was Karen. She had light brown hair, tied up in a high ponytail, and very expressive green eyes. She wore a denim jacket over a tight t-shirt and seemed to move with ease among everyone present, greeting and joking as if she were an essential part of the group. The curious thing was that, at times, I felt her gaze on me. When our eyes met, she would give a slight smile and look away. I wondered if it was a product of my imagination, because there are plenty of girls who are surprised to see someone so tall, and maybe she was just looking at me out of curiosity. As the minutes passed, Dylan started a conversation circle with some of them. We started laughing at anecdotes from the team, exchanging stories from classes. Karen was part of that group, and, suddenly, she started talking to me more frequently. It was a casual conversation, nothing forced. She asked me about my height, if my knees hurt often, how I had learned to manage despite being so big. As we talked, I realized that her gaze was frank and that she laughed genuinely at my comments. I felt a tingling in my stomach that I had not experienced before with any other girl. At one point, Dylan suggested we play a board game that was on one of the nearby tables. Karen and I ended up sitting next to each other, which made it easier for us to keep talking in low voices while the rest were engrossed in the game's dynamics. She told me she liked photography and had taken a couple of courses over the summer to learn editing techniques. I told her about my love for video games and how I had fun playing online with Tony and some friends. Each exchange brought us a little closer. When the gathering came to an end, I was surprised to notice that I had spent almost the entire night with Karen, sharing anecdotes and even laughing at trivial things. Before we left, she took out her phone and asked if she could add my number. The casual way she did it took me by surprise, so I nodded with a slight blush and gave it to her. She called it a couple of times, so I could save hers too. When it was time to say goodbye, I had the feeling that something positive was beginning to form between us. Starting that weekend, we began to write to each other daily. At first, they were simple messages, questions like, "How are you?" or "What are your plans for today?" But they soon turned into longer conversations. We exchanged memes, talked about our musical tastes, and shared YouTube videos that we found funny or interesting. With each message, I felt a growing enthusiasm. She told me about her art classes, her dreams of becoming a designer or a professional photographer, and I would share confidences about my passion for basketball and my insecurities about fitting into a larger university environment. Her responses were always understanding, sweet, and full of encouragement. Little by little, I began to entertain the idea of formally asking her out to a place that was not a group party. The opportunity arose a week later. I suggested we meet at a nearby shopping mall for coffee and maybe to look at some clothing stores or a video game stand. She accepted, and I was more excited than I had been in a long time. On the day of the date, I got ready with care. I even asked my mother to help me iron a shirt that I almost never wore and tried to control my nerves. When I saw her appear, I felt my heart pound. She was wearing tight jeans and a black t-shirt with an artistic design on the front. We greeted each other with a hug that was very significant to me, because I was not sure if she would be so effusive. However, her arms wrapped around my waist, since I am very tall, and that reassured me. We spent the afternoon wandering from store to store, making jokes about the things we saw, and having coffee while we talked about our favorite series. At the end of the meeting, there was a brief moment of silence, charged with expectation, in which our gazes met. I did not dare to kiss her, and was not sure if I should. I just smiled and gave her another hug. We agreed to see each other again soon. A couple of weeks went by like that. We went out to different places: an ice cream parlor, an outdoor basketball court where we jokingly played one-on-one, a hamburger restaurant where we laughed at my ability to eat twice as much as she did. Little by little, we felt more comfortable with each other. It was during one of those outings, while we were walking through a park, that I gathered the courage to ask her if she wanted to be my girlfriend. My hands were sweaty and my stomach was in a knot. She looked me in the eyes with a knowing smile and, without hesitating, said yes. I felt an electric current of happiness, something hard to describe. I took her hand, and we continued walking, talking about future plans and joking about our graduation, which was just around the corner. In the following days, I lived through a period of genuine emotional euphoria. If I was not training with the team, I was messaging with Karen, sharing every detail of the day, asking about her classes, and telling her my plans for the weekend. She responded with enthusiasm. She sent me pictures of herself in class, selfies in front of a mirror, or shared motivational quotes when I told her I was feeling anxious about the next game. For me, This was new. I had never had such an intense, close relationship, and I let myself be carried away by an almost naive illusion. After a few weeks, it became common for us to spend time at her house on weekends. Her parents were quite flexible and often went out, so the house was semi-empty and we could enjoy watching movies in the living room or cooking something light in the kitchen. One afternoon, we got together to watch a science fiction movie marathon. Tony had told me he was dying of envy because I had a clear field to be with her, but in reality, all we did was cuddle on the couch and laugh at the scenes. Karen also seemed very affectionate. She would hug me, give me soft kisses on the cheek, and I felt on top of the world. However, an event occurred that changed everything abruptly. That afternoon, we were watching one of those futuristic movies when Karen got up to go to the bathroom. She left her phone on the coffee table, next to mine. I continued watching the movie, but I heard her cell phone vibrate, and, by reflex, I glanced at it. It was an incoming message from her best friend, Laura. The summarized text in the notification said something like, "Are you seriously still with that giant?" I am dying of laughter. And I did not get to read more, because the notification disappeared. My mind went blank for a second. I wondered what she meant, if they were making fun of me, or if it was just an inside joke. At that moment, I made a mistake, or maybe not such a mistake, depending on how you look at it. I unlocked her phone to read the full message. I felt nervous, as Karen could come back at any moment. I looked at the chat with Laura, and, with my heart beating at full speed, I discovered that it was not a simple joke. There were numerous messages in which they both made fun of me, my shy personality, the way I dressed, and even my passion for basketball. But the most painful thing was finding comments that referred to a bet. "You already won the bet. How much longer do you plan to stay with him?" Laura wrote in one of the messages, and Karen replied with laughter and emojis, confessing that I still have a couple of weeks to go to fulfill the promise. I felt my chest burn. It was as if acid had been poured into my veins. I quickly reviewed the chat history and confirmed that this whole time, since we started dating, had been part of a game, of a frivolous bet that Karen and her friend had made. They commented on terrible things, that I was an adorable little fool, that I had no idea of their plan, and that they were waiting to see how long it would take for me to fall in love with her, only to, surely, laugh in my face later. My eyes welled up with tears, and I had a hard time believing it. How could it be that this girl, with whom I felt such a connection, was deceiving me in the most cruel and superficial way? Remember, for more stories like this, subscribe, like, and activate the notification bell. Let us continue. I heard the bathroom door open. I hurried to close the conversations and put the cell phone back where it was. When Karen returned, she found me sitting with my gaze fixed on the television screen, but my mind in a whirlwind of pain. She tried to get closer and hugged me from behind, asking if I was okay. I simply forced a smile and told her yes, that I was just focused on the movie. She did not seem to suspect anything, or maybe she did not notice my rigid expression. I remained silent for the rest of the session, unable to enjoy the movie, wishing to go home as soon as possible. As soon as the movie ended, I told her I had to leave because my mother had asked me for a favor. I said goodbye to her drily, with a quick kiss on the cheek that was far from the affectionate kisses of before. Karen looked at me strangely, but did not ask any more questions. As soon as I left her house, I walked a few blocks and could not hold back the tears. A feeling of betrayal completely invaded me, mixed with fury and humiliation. I wanted to scream, to hit something, but instead, I held back and walked with my head down, trying not to attract the attention of passers-by. The next few hours were torture. I locked myself in my room, ignoring Karen's messages asking where I was and why I had left so quickly. It was hard for me to even read what she wrote, because every time I saw her name on the screen, I remembered the mocking messages she shared with her friend. I did not reply at all. I spent the night turning the situation over in my mind, wondering how it was possible for someone to fake so much. The next day at school, I avoided her. I did not want to talk to her or see her face. However, I had to behave in a reasonably normal way so as not to arouse suspicion, because I was too hurt and did not want to be subjected to an interrogation. 2 days later, I ran into Tony on the basketball court while we were training. He saw me looking so apathetic that as soon as we finished, he pulled me aside from the rest to ask me what was wrong. I hesitated to tell him, but Tony has always been my confidant. I ended up revealing everything I had read on Karen's phone and how I discovered the miserable bet. His reaction was immediate. His face turned red with rage, he clenched his fists, and he muttered a series of curses against Karen and her friend. He told me that I could not let them get away with it, that we had to get revenge in a decisive way so they would understand the pain they had caused. At that moment, I was still confused between sadness and disappointment, and I did not have the mind for planning revenge. Tony, with his impetuous character, insisted over and over that something had to be done, that we could not let it go. He promised he would help me design a foolproof plan to make those girls pay for playing with my feelings. At first, I was not sure I wanted to do it. I have never been one to seek revenge. I prefer to stay away from toxic people and go my own way. But Tony slowly convinced me that this situation deserved a lesson. If you do nothing, they will get away with it and maybe do the same to another guy, he argued vehemently. Cruelty cannot go unpunished, he added. He was partly right. So, on a Saturday afternoon, I met him at his house, and we started to devise the plan. The first thing he suggested was that I not show my discomfort immediately. On the contrary, I should act as if I had discovered nothing, resume my displays of affection with Karen, and pretend that the relationship was still going great. That way, she would not suspect anything and would lower her guard. Meanwhile, Tony and I would map out the next steps to gather information and deliver a definitive blow. The truth is, it was hard for me to pretend, but my anger was so great that I felt I could endure the hypocrisy for a few more weeks if it meant I could expose her. The following week, I dedicated myself to re-engaging with Karen. I started writing to her frequently again, telling her I missed her, showing affection. She seemed happy, as if the strange episode of my withdrawal was behind her. She invited me to her house again, and I went, this time with a mixture of repulsion and determination. It hurt me to have to kiss her and pretend that everything was fine, but I kept telling myself that it was part of the strategy. In fact, during those visits, I made sure to ask her more personal questions, to get intimate in conversations that would allow me to learn details about her insecurities, her greatest fears, and the secrets she did not usually tell other people. I felt dirty because I was using her trust in the same way she had played with me. But now I understood how easy it is to manipulate someone when they pretend to feel affection. During one of those occasions, Karen asked me to help her print a project on her desktop computer. We were in her room, and she left me alone for a few minutes while she went to get paper for the printer in the living room. That was my opportunity to snoop a little in her folders and check for files that could be useful for the revenge. I stumbled upon something I did not expect, a virtual diary she kept in a text file, almost like a personal blog where she poured out all her frustrations and secrets. It struck me that she dedicated entire paragraphs to commenting on her insecurities about her body image, fights with her family, and even things she felt towards me, in which she described me as a good guy, but too naive. It stung to read that, although I restrained myself from delving deeper, fearing she might return at any moment. However, I managed to connect my USB drive and copy that file, along with other folders. My heart was racing. I was afraid she would discover me, but everything went well. That file became pure gold for the plan. When I showed it to Tony, his eyes widened, and he exclaimed that we had in our hands the way to destroy her reputation at school. Besides the comments against me, there were confessions about other classmates, about her own friend Laura, and even about teachers. A whole arsenal of criticism and mockery that she had written thinking no one else would read it. It was obvious that if this came out, Karen would be in a very bad position, as would the small group of popular girls she hung out with. The plan moved to the next level. Tony proposed that the chosen day for the revenge be the end-of-course project presentation day, an event attended by all the senior students and several teachers. Karen was going to present a visual arts project, and it was her moment to shine the most. We agreed to spread all the screenshots, the excerpts from the diary, and the chats where she made fun of me and others to as many people as possible during that morning. We would take advantage of the school's strong internet connection and the students' tendency to forward all kinds of controversial content. In a matter of minutes, the information would fly from phone to phone. In the days leading up to it, I had trouble sleeping. I was full of contradictions. Part of me felt dirty for attacking someone I had sincerely loved so viciously, but then I remembered the pain, the humiliation, the mockery I had been a victim of. I convinced myself that she deserved it. The crucial day arrived. I headed to school with Tony. We had a flash drive with all the copies of the documents and screenshots ready to be sent. It was something extremely simple. We just had to connect to the Wi-Fi, open a broadcast list in some messaging app, and add the contacts from the school. We also planned to share it via email with certain influential teachers and students so that no corner would be left uninformed. Mid-morning, just as people were starting to gather in the auditorium for the presentations, Tony and I isolated ourselves in a less traveled hallway. There, from my phone, we dropped the bomb. We uploaded the screenshots, excerpts from her diary, chat messages that proved the bet, and all kinds of evidence that showed the manipulation and two-faced nature of Karen and her friend Laura. In the first few minutes, nothing happened, but after 10 or 15 minutes, I began to notice the buzzing of people's cell phones in the auditorium and in the hallway, the look of surprise on some faces, and the way many turned to look at Karen, who was at the front, ready to present her project. What followed was chaos. Laughter, murmurs, and stifled screams took over the place. I saw some students exchange looks of astonishment, and more than one covered their mouth as they read the content of the leaks. Karen, standing on the stage, noticed that something strange was happening because people started to ignore her presentation and look at their phones. When she realized that she was the protagonist of the scandal, she lost her concentration. The trembling in her hands was noticeable, and her voice began to stammer. No one was listening to her anymore. Almost everyone was engrossed in reading the files on their screens. When she finished her presentation, without applause and amidst a collective murmur, I received a message from Tony that said, "Done. It is done." In a matter of seconds, the hallways turned into a whirlwind of hurtful comments and mockery towards Karen and Laura. Some people congratulated me in a low voice for the move, although without being certain that I was the author. Others were scandalized by the level of revelations, since in the diary, Karen spoke ill of other girls she considered her friends, criticized teachers, and complained about her own family. It was a devastating blow to her reputation. The rumor was that her group of friends had become a target of criticism, and that even several popular boys were furious because they realized she also spoke trash about them. The hardest part was seeing Karen run out of the auditorium, her eyes full of tears, followed by Laura. They tried to talk to some people, but no one seemed willing to offer them compassion. A couple of teachers came out to try to understand what was happening, but the students were faster at spreading the information. In the blink of an eye, the news had reached almost the entire school. I kept my distance, watching the scene with a knot in my stomach, not knowing whether to feel satisfaction or remorse. Tony, on the other hand, patted me on the back, telling me they deserved it for everything they had done. At the end of the day, when I left school, I ran into Karen at the exit. She saw me and ran towards me, sobbing, demanding an explanation. I wanted to pretend I did not know what she was talking about, but she screamed, "You know, right? You did it." Her gaze was full of anger and shame. I responded coldly that yes, I knew everything, that I knew she had been with me for a simple bet. She tried to explain herself. She told me that things had gotten out of control, that at first it was a bet, but then she started to feel something real. I did not believe her for a second. I was too hurt. I spat at her that she was a horrible person, that what she did to me was unforgivable, and that she deserved all the bad things that were happening to her. She, in tears, tried to get closer, but I took a step back and walked away without letting her finish her argument. As the weeks went by, the situation for Karen and her circle worsened. Tensions became so strong at the school that her parents ended up transferring her to another school. Her friend Laura did the same. As the social pressure became unbearable, people pointed at them as traitors and fakes, some even insulted them. Their group of popular girls disintegrated due to the internal fights that arose from the leaked chats. For me, it was a relief to stop seeing her in the hallways. Tony gloated about having served justice, although I maintained a strange feeling between consummated revenge and an emptiness I did not know how to fill. At least, I no longer felt the agony of betrayal daily, nor did I have to pretend anymore. At home, my parents noticed that something had happened. They saw me sad, but I never told them the story in detail. I just told them I had had problems with my girlfriend and that we had broken up. My mother hugged me and assured me that I would find someone better, while my father, not very expressive, simply patted me on the shoulder as a sign of support. Tony and I moved on with our sports and academic plans. I focused on my final exams and the procedures to enter the university with the basketball scholarship they offered me. The idea of whether I had been too cruel kept running through my mind. But deep down, I remembered the mockery, Karen's sham, and I felt justified. Over time, I reflected on what had happened. I understood that although the revenge gave me a certain catharsis, it also left a stain that does not completely wash away. I became someone who humiliated another person in public, without caring about the consequences it would have on her life. On the other hand, I also understood that Karen had manipulated and mocked me in a perverse way. Perhaps, if I had done nothing, she would have continued with that attitude, and I would have been left with the image of a foolish lover whom no one would respect. Opinions vary, but many classmates supported me, assuring that she reaped what she sowed. In a later conversation with Tony, I thanked him for helping me plan everything. I told him that without him, I probably would have let the resentment take over me without taking any action. Tony laughed and replied that sometimes people need to learn the hard way, that their actions have consequences, that no one has the right to play with others' feelings without expecting repercussions. Was it the right thing to do? It is an interesting moral debate, but ultimately, I do not regret what I did. Karen learned that betting with someone else's heart can be too costly, and I learned that you do not always have to be naive. Sometimes it is necessary to defend yourself, even with methods that one would never have contemplated under normal circumstances. After graduation, with the controversy already faded, I went to the university. I chose to play basketball in the Division I league. I moved to another city, met new friends, and, over time, I tried to form new romantic relationships. It was not easy, because my trust had been damaged and it was still hard for me to open up completely to someone. However, I decided not to let that heartbreak turn me into a permanently distrustful person. Little by little, I found my balance and recognized that, as painful as the experience was, it had taught me to identify the people who truly value me.